She never saw it coming. 1 second, the airport was buzzing like every other day. Voices layered over each other, the churn of wheels on linoleum, gate numbers blinking overhead. Then everything shattered. A sharp sound, sudden, jarring, cracked through the terminal like a warning shot. Conversations choked mid-word. The source? An elderly woman's cane, spinning across the floor after being swatted from her hand. The crowd froze, unsure if they'd just witnessed a mistake or something worse. What followed removed all doubt. Standing across from the woman was a flight attendant, jaw tight, name tag catching the light. Taylor McKenna. She wasn't whispering. "I told you to move aside," she snapped, voice slicing through the stunned hush like broken glass. "This line's for first-class passengers, not for people like you." People like you. The words landed hard. Audible gasps flickered through the terminal, but not a single person stepped forward. No one said a thing. Some shifted uncomfortably. Most just stared. Even the monitors, the boarding announcements, everything felt like it held its breath. The woman didn't flinch. She bent, retrieved her cane without a word, and stood. She said nothing about being shoved, nothing about the public humiliation. Her silence didn't feel like fear. It felt like thunder waiting to roll. She looked directly at Taylor, eyes unreadable. Then came a sentence, delivered without drama, without anger, but with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "You just made the biggest mistake of your career." Taylor scoffed. No one stepped in. The woman didn't push further. She simply turned and held her position, ticket in hand. 10 minutes earlier, she had been sitting alone by the window in the first-class lounge, quiet, unremarkable to anyone who wasn't looking. Her clothes were simple, her hair neat, a soft green dress, a silver brooch near the collarbone, and an ivory-handled cane. There was nothing loud about her presence, and maybe that was why Taylor hadn't even looked twice. Nearby, a man in a suit, young, courteous, offered her his seat when he noticed her standing. She declined with a small smile. He nodded, returned to his laptop. That was all. No fuss, no attention. If anyone had been watching, they'd have assumed she was someone's grandmother, maybe heading off to see family. Taylor had noticed her, of course. She had scanned the lounge earlier, taking mental notes of who belonged and who didn't. There were the usual business travelers in navy suits, women with designer luggage, couples that looked like they summered in Europe. Then there was the old woman with the cane, alone and clearly out of place. Taylor didn't hate old people. She just hated when people slowed things down. The boarding gate was always chaos, and first class had to run like clockwork. There was a rhythm, a standard. People who flew that section knew the drill. You didn't stop to fumble through your bag. You didn't ask too many questions. You walked up, scanned in, and moved on. Efficient, predictable. So when the woman approached the gate, Taylor was already annoyed. She didn't glance at the ticket, just raised her hand and blocked her path. "This is first class only," she said, her tone clipped and performative. It was the kind of tone meant to be overheard, the kind that announced to everyone nearby, "I'm in control." The woman answered calmly, "I'm aware." Taylor hesitated, glanced at the ticket. The boarding pass looked legitimate, but it couldn't be. Not with that cardigan, not with that tote bag, not with those shoes. Taylor frowned, scrutinized the ticket under the light, searching for something, anything, that proved her right. "Are you sure this is yours?" she asked, louder than necessary. The woman didn't blink. "Yes, I'm quite certain." Taylor checked behind her. No companion, no assistant, no caregiver, no VIP escort badge. Nothing to explain how this woman could have ended up with a seat where CEOs usually sipped champagne and scrolled on company phones. Her voice rose. "Clearly there's been some mistake," she said, gesturing toward the economy line. "You belong over there." The woman didn't move. Taylor's irritation boiled. She had dealt with this before. People trying to sneak into first class with fake upgrades, or worse, thinking kindness could earn them a seat they hadn't paid for. But this was starting to feel deliberate. "I've had enough of this nonsense," she barked. "Step aside." The woman didn't budge. Something in Taylor snapped. She slapped the boarding pass out of the woman's hand. It landed hard on the floor. Then came the cane, falling again, echoing. The terminal went still. A man nearby, the same one who had offered the seat earlier, leaned forward in disbelief. A woman standing behind the barrier covered her mouth. Others shifted, whispering, but Taylor didn't see them. You need to move, she said, her voice colder now. You're holding up the line. The woman leaned down again, picked up her cane, stood, held Taylor's gaze, and then she said it once more, this time quieter. You just made the biggest mistake of your career. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. 5 minutes later, she was still standing there, silent, waiting. Taylor paced. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone so unremarkable. The woman's refusal to move, to argue, to play her part in the routine of confrontation felt like defiance of a different kind. It unnerved her. She looked around, expecting someone, anyone, to back her up. But the silence in the terminal had only thickened. No one had left. No one had stepped forward. Everyone was just watching. It was then that a new voice broke through the static. Is there a problem here? Taylor turned and froze. The man approaching wore a tailored navy suit with a small, discreet lapel pin shaped like the airline's insignia. His badge identified him as Richard Montgomery, Director of Guest Relations. Taylor had seen him in the internal newsletters, in training videos, in the rare high-stakes customer incidents where corporate got involved. He walked past Taylor without acknowledging her. Mrs. Grant, he said, voice low and controlled. We're honored to have you flying with us today. I apologize for this unacceptable delay. The woman, Lucille Grant, nodded once, nothing dramatic, and handed him her boarding pass. Richard examined it briefly and then turned slowly toward Taylor. His tone changed. Step aside, Miss McKenna. There was no anger in his voice, no shouting, just finality. Taylor opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She felt the heat rise, not from embarrassment, but confusion. She glanced down at the name printed on the boarding pass, Lucille M. Grant. First class, seat 1A. It still didn't make sense. Only when Richard addressed her again, eyes locked on hers, did reality begin to click into place. Did you even check the system before you denied her boarding? Taylor swallowed hard. I scanned the pass, she said. It didn't look. Did you check the system? The question hung like an anvil. She hadn't. She never had to. People didn't usually push back. They knew their place. If someone didn't look like they belonged in first class, they usually didn't. Her silence was answer enough. Richard took a slow breath and turned toward the younger attendant nearby. Leah, escort Mrs. Grant to her seat, please. Make sure she's comfortable. Leah, wide-eyed but composed, nodded and extended a hand toward Lucille. Right this way, ma'am. As Lucille passed Taylor, she didn't speak. She didn't look angry. She didn't even seem particularly interested. But her presence felt weighted, like something was shifting. The people standing nearby instinctively stepped back, letting her through. She moved with the same calm, deliberate pace she'd had all along. Nothing theatrical, nothing showy. And Taylor, for the first time, noticed that no one was looking at Lucille anymore. They were all looking at her. Richard Montgomery didn't leave. Instead, he stepped closer. His voice dropped low enough so only Taylor could hear. When this plane takes off, you and I are going to have a very serious conversation. Taylor's heart stumbled. Around them, the boarding resumed. People slowly filtered forward, but the mood was different. Eyes darted between gate and jet bridge. Conversations restarted, but only in hushed tones. Taylor stood rigid, still gripping the handheld scanner like it could anchor her. In her earpiece, the lead cabin crew called for last boarding. The plane was nearly full. Passengers were seated. She could still fix this. She just needed a moment to reset. But that moment never came. The intercom cracked to life. Miss McKenna, report to the cockpit immediately. The words didn't come from her supervisor. They came from the captain. Taylor blinked. No one had ever summoned her to the cockpit before a flight. Not in her 8 years with the airline. It wasn't protocol. It wasn't normal. It wasn't good. She walked the aisle like it was a narrow bridge suspended over a canyon. Passengers turned as she passed. Some whispered. Others didn't bother hiding their curiosity. When she reached the cockpit, the door slid open. Inside, Captain Reynolds sat with both hands resting on the controls. Next to him, the first officer glanced away politely. But it was the screen behind them that captured her attention. A video call was already in progress. The face on the screen belonged to Stephen Caldwell, Chief Operating Officer of the entire airline. His voice came before she could process the image. Miss McKenna, he said, you have exactly 30 seconds to explain why you publicly humiliated a first-class passenger at gate B6. Taylor's mouth went dry. I thought there was an issue with the ticket, she said, trying to hold her ground. Did you verify it? No, she admitted, almost too quietly. Captain Reynolds didn't speak, but his exhale filled the silence. Richard Montgomery, standing just behind her now, folded his arms. Stephen's tone darkened. Do you even understand who you just humiliated in front of a plane full of witnesses and 24 employees? Taylor blinked. She was just a passenger, she said. She is Lucille Grant, Stephen replied. She founded this airline. Taylor's heart stopped. There it was, the drop. The truth. Everything she hadn't seen. Lucille Grant. The name had been printed on every company plaque, mentioned in every training. She had built the airline from the ground up, years before Taylor had even finished school. And Taylor had treated her like a problem to manage, like a lie to disprove. The cockpit felt smaller now. Stephen wasn't finished. You will go back to that cabin. You will apologize, publicly, loud enough for every single passenger who witnessed your behavior to hear it. And you will personally ensure she is cared for throughout this flight. He paused. Refuse, and your uniform will be pulled before this plane lands. The screen went dark. The call ended. Captain Reynolds said nothing. He didn't need to. Taylor stepped out of the cockpit, not because she wanted to, but because there was no place left to go. The return walk to first class was a blur. Taylor couldn't feel her legs, couldn't hear the passengers, couldn't block out the echo of Stephen Caldwell's voice ringing inside her skull. She had humiliated the founder of the airline, in public, in uniform, in front of 100 witnesses. She stepped into the cabin. Every passenger knew. Whether they'd seen it all or just heard whispers, it didn't matter. The shame followed her like a shadow she couldn't outwalk. She found Lucille Grant seated near the front, aisle seat, Kane resting beside her. Next to her stood Leah, still nearby, still watching. Taylor stopped. Her throat tightened. She forced the words out. Mrs. Grant, she said, low and trembling, I want to sincerely apologize for the way I treated you earlier. The silence that followed swallowed the cabin whole. No engine hum, no clatter of drink carts, just dozens of heads shifting slightly, dozens of ears leaning forward. Lucille turned her head slowly. She didn't reply right away. The pause wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate, measured. I accept your apology, she said. Taylor's chest lifted for half a second. Then Lucille added calmly, now please repeat that apology for them. Taylor blinked. For who? Lucille tilted her head slightly, the smallest gesture in the world, somehow carrying the weight of judgment. For everyone who saw you speak to me that way, everyone who watched you question my seat, everyone who heard you say I didn't belong. Taylor stood frozen. It wasn't the apology that terrified her. It was the spotlight, the crowd, the knowledge that this would follow her. She glanced sideways. Leah had taken a step back. A few rows down, the young businessman who had offered Lucille his seat earlier leaned forward, watching. Taylor cleared her throat. Her voice cracked. I owe an apology to every passenger here. More heads turned. More eyes fixed on her. Before boarding, I made an unjustified assumption about a fellow passenger. I treated Mrs. Grant with disrespect and questioned her right to sit in first class without verifying her credentials. Her voice faltered. A passenger in the second row crossed their arms. Another raised an eyebrow. My behavior was unprofessional, inappropriate, and completely unacceptable, she said, louder now, willing herself to reach the end. For that, I sincerely apologize. She didn't expect applause. She didn't expect understanding. She didn't get either. The silence returned. Then Lucille spoke again, evenly. Thank you for your apology, Miss McKenna, but I want you to understand something clearly. Taylor turned to her, bracing herself. If I had been just another elderly passenger, Lucille said, if I had held no position or title, would you be standing here right now apologizing? It wasn't a trap. It wasn't even accusatory. It was worse. It was honest. Taylor's voice barely escaped her lips. No, I wouldn't. A ripple passed through the cabin. Not loud, not obvious, but present. Lucille studied her for a long beat. Then she leaned back, adjusting the position of the glass of water on her tray, as if the conversation was over, as if no more needed to be said. Taylor turned, desperate to escape the scrutiny. Miss McKenna. She stopped. Richard Montgomery stood at the front of the cabin, arms crossed, voice low but firm. You'll personally attend to Mrs. Grant for the remainder of this flight. There was no room for debate in his tone. The passengers didn't react. They didn't need to. The punishment spoke for itself. This wasn't just about service. This was a declaration, a visible reminder of consequence. Taylor nodded once and returned to her post. She remained in view. She didn't get to disappear into the galley. She didn't get to hand the responsibility to someone else. Lucille opened a novel, slowly flipped a page. The message couldn't have been clearer. Taylor stayed alert, ready. She poured drinks, checked trays, responded to calls. But her focus never strayed from seat 1A. Not because she feared another confrontation, but because that seat now represented everything she had to relearn. Once, she would have called herself seasoned, efficient, experienced. Now she wasn't sure what she was anymore. Near the end of meal service, she approached with a bottle of water. Her steps slowed as she neared Lucille's seat. "I brought you some fresh water," she said, almost inaudibly. Lucille closed her book gently, set it aside. "Thank you." Taylor placed the bottle on the tray table. It wobbled slightly. She stepped back. Lucille looked at her. "You've worked here a long time, haven't you, Miss McKenna?" Taylor hesitated. "Yes." Lucille nodded. "Then you, of all people, should understand the importance of treating every passenger with equal respect." Taylor didn't answer. Lucille wasn't finished. "And in all that time, has anyone ever questioned whether you belong here?" The words sank like stone. Taylor didn't reply. Couldn't. She knew the answer. She'd never had to prove herself. Never been asked to justify her presence. Never been told she didn't look the part. She had always belonged. And that, she realized, was the very problem. Lucille turned back to her book, didn't say anything else. Taylor stepped away, but the question clung to her like a second skin. The lesson wasn't over, not even close. The remainder of the flight moved forward as if nothing had happened, at least on the surface. Drinks were poured. Meals were served. Passengers tapped screens or skimmed through magazines. But Taylor knew. She could feel it every time she walked down the aisle. She wasn't just being watched. She was being measured. Each time she passed Lucille's seat, her mind jolted back to that moment at the gate, the snap of the cane, the cold dismissal, the certainty in Lucille's voice. That sentence. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your career." She hadn't believed it then. She did now. She kept her head down, followed procedure to the letter, and stayed painfully aware of every movement. The hours dragged. She tried to busy herself with small tasks, tidying, checking belts, adjusting trays, but nothing quieted the tension sitting in her chest like a weight. Eventually, as the cabin dimmed and the flight entered its final phase, Lucille shifted in her seat and reached for the call button. Taylor saw the signal light up and responded before anyone else could. Lucille didn't look up when Taylor arrived. She simply said, "I'd like a cup of hot tea, please." Taylor nodded. "Of course." She returned with it quickly, carefully setting the cup down on the tray. As she turned to step away, Lucille's voice stopped her. "You've been doing this job for a long time, haven't you?" Taylor nodded. "I have." Lucille looked straight ahead, not at her. "Then you already know that what happened today wasn't about protocol." Taylor said nothing. Lucille continued, her voice calm but unshakable. "It was about what you assumed, what you decided before I even opened my mouth." Taylor gripped the edge of the cart beside her. "And when I didn't fit what you expected, you made me invisible. Then, when I wouldn't go quietly, you made me a problem." Taylor stared ahead, throat tightening. Lucille didn't press further. She picked up her tea, took a small sip, and placed it back down. "Has anyone ever made you feel like that?" Taylor didn't answer. Lucille looked up at her, not with anger or pity, just quiet expectation. "Has anyone ever looked at you and assumed you didn't belong?" Taylor's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Lucille nodded slightly, the gesture subtle but significant. "That's the difference. I felt that every day. You felt it for the first time today, and it brought you to your knees." Taylor turned and walked away. She moved through the cabin like she was weightless and heavy at the same time. The words didn't leave her. They hung over her like mist, invisible but impossible to shake off. For the first time in her career, she wasn't walking with control. She was just trying to get through the shift. Back at the galley, Richard Montgomery was waiting. Arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You're struggling," he said. "I'm fine," she replied. "No, you're not." Taylor didn't respond. Richard leaned forward slightly, voice lower. You made an assumption about Mrs. Grant, not about her ticket, not about policy, about who she was, about what someone like her looks like when they're in seat 1A. I didn't mean to. It doesn't matter what you meant, Richard said sharply. It matters what you did. Taylor stood still, words tangled in her throat. You've worked here long enough to know better, he continued. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to be honest. She waited. Do you actually understand what you're apologizing for? Taylor met his gaze for a second too long. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to believe that saying the words earlier was enough, that following orders and keeping her head down counted for something. But she didn't answer. Richard didn't push. He stepped back, then get back to work. And she did. She moved through the cabin as though every step was part of a test. Her spine stiffened under the pressure of judgment. Real or imagined, it didn't matter anymore. It was there. It was hers. Near the end of the flight, as the descent was announced, passengers began stirring. Seatbacks were raised, trays clicked into place, and Taylor returned to Lucille's row one final time. Lucille sat calmly, her seatbelt already fastened, her gaze out the window. Taylor hesitated. Then Lucille spoke without turning. You're thinking about it now, aren't you? Taylor didn't respond. Lucille turned her head slowly. Why you did it? Taylor inhaled, slow and shaky. I don't know. Lucille studied her for a moment, then nodded. Then maybe it's time you find out. The landing gear dropped. The plane began its final approach. The seatbelt light chimed. Taylor stood beside Lucille's seat, unsure what to say, unsure if there was anything left to say. She had said sorry. She had been humiliated. She had done everything required. But none of it felt finished. And for the first time, she wasn't waiting to be forgiven. She was wondering if she deserved to be. The plane touched down with a smooth, calculated thud. A soft chorus of seatbelts clicking echoed through the cabin. The intercom hummed with a familiar announcement welcoming passengers to their destination, urging them to remain seated until the aircraft came to a complete stop. Taylor stood near the galley, hands at her sides, heart pacing unevenly. She wasn't thinking about layovers or connections. She wasn't thinking about gate numbers or service procedures. She was thinking about what waited beyond the jet bridge. Near the front of the cabin, Richard Montgomery was on the phone, voice low but urgent. His posture was different now, tense, locked in. Taylor didn't need to hear the words to understand something more was coming. Lucille remained in her seat, composed, unhurried. She reached for her belongings with the same measured grace that had defined her the entire flight. Her cane rested neatly beside her, her bag clasped with quiet precision. She didn't glance at Taylor. She didn't need to. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers rose. The aisles filled with the usual shuffle, but nothing felt usual anymore. Taylor stepped aside as the first-class passengers reached for their coats, their bags. She watched them move, watched the way their eyes slid toward her and away again. No one said anything. They didn't have to. Then Lucille stood. She adjusted the strap of her handbag and turned to Taylor, locking eyes for a brief moment that felt like a decision being made. Walk with me, she said. Taylor blinked, caught off guard. Excuse me? Lucille nodded toward the open jet bridge. Walk with me. It wasn't a question. Taylor hesitated. Every instinct told her to stay behind, to avoid the crowd outside that might still be talking, still watching. But before she could speak, Richard's voice came from behind her, sharp, direct. Go. She had no choice. Lucille moved forward with that same slow confidence, her steps sure. Taylor followed a half pace behind, every movement magnified. The closer they got to the terminal, the heavier her body felt. Her thoughts spun in a loop. What's waiting? Who's waiting? The moment they stepped through the jet bridge, she saw them. A cluster of airline executives near a private terminal entrance. Among them, Stephen Caldwell stood at the center, flanked by two uniformed security officers. His expression was unreadable, arms crossed as he watched their approach. Taylor's heart dropped. Lucille didn't pause. She walked straight toward them, commanding the space without effort. Taylor tried to steady her breath. Stephen stepped forward. Miss McKenna, he said flatly, we need to speak with you. Taylor opened her mouth, but no words came. Her throat tightened. Not here, Stephen added, then gestured to a set of frosted glass doors nearby. Come with us. Taylor's legs felt like cement. Then Lucille stepped forward, not between them, but beside her. Her voice was calm, low, unwavering. Miss McKenna understands the gravity of her actions, she said, and I'm confident she's prepared to accept responsibility. Stephen's eyes flicked toward Lucille. He didn't argue. He nodded once, then turned toward the door. Taylor moved. Every step toward those doors felt heavier than the last. It didn't feel like a meeting. It felt like sentencing. Inside was a sleek, cold conference room with a long table and 3 people already seated: James Whitmore, Senior Operations Manager, and 2 executives from compliance and HR. Thick folders were placed in front of them, untouched but ominous. She sat at the far end of the table, barely hearing the door click shut behind her. "You know why you're here," James said. His voice wasn't angry, just final. Taylor nodded. "Then explain exactly what happened," he continued. Taylor stared at the table for a long second before looking up. "I made an assumption," she said slowly, "about a passenger. I didn't check her boarding pass properly. I treated her unfairly, and She stopped. James waited. "I humiliated her," Taylor finished. The words didn't free her. They locked her in place. James leaned back, tapping a finger against the folder in front of him. "You've been with this airline for 10 years. Taylor nodded. "Then you know that what you did qualifies for immediate termination." Her stomach twisted. James didn't open the folder. "The only reason you're not already out of uniform is because Mrs. Grant requested you be given the opportunity to speak first." Taylor's breath hitched. What?" "She requested it," James confirmed, gaze firm. "Now explain to us why we should listen." Taylor sat frozen for a moment. Then she drew a deep breath. "I don't expect to keep my job," she said. "I know what I did, but I don't want this to be the last thing I do here. I want a chance to show I understand, that I can change." The room was still. James folded his hands. "What does that look like to you?" "I'm not sure yet," she said honestly, "but I'm ready to find out. I'm ready to be held accountable." The executives didn't speak right away. Eventually, James nodded toward the door. "Wait outside. We'll call you back." Taylor stood, walked out. Lucille was waiting in the lounge area. She turned when Taylor stepped out. Their eyes met again. "They're discussing your future," Lucille said softly. Taylor nodded. "I understand." Lucille tilted her head. "Do you?" Taylor exhaled slowly. "For the first time, I think I do." The minutes stretched. Taylor sat in the waiting area, eyes fixed on the frosted conference room doors, heart pounding like a slow, deliberate drumbeat. She wasn't rehearsing anymore. There was nothing left to prepare. She had said the truth, stripped it bare, offered it up without asking for anything in return. Lucille didn't speak. She just sat nearby, calm, observant, never pressing, never relenting. Her presence didn't demand attention. It commanded it without trying. Taylor finally broke the silence. "Why did you ask them to let me speak?" Lucille didn't answer right away. Then, with her gaze steady and voice quiet, she said, "Because I wanted to see what you'd do with the chance." Taylor looked away. The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. She didn't know what she had expected. Maybe forgiveness, maybe punishment. But Lucille hadn't offered either. She had given Taylor a test. The doors opened. James Whitmore stepped out, followed by the other executives. Stephen Caldwell remained just behind them, his posture rigid, expression unreadable. "We've reached a decision," James said. Taylor stood. "Effective immediately," James continued. "You are placed on probation." The words hit harder than expected. It wasn't relief. It wasn't closure. It was something in between, something with weight. "You will complete a series of mandatory trainings: anti-bias, leadership development, and service recovery. Your performance will be evaluated over the next 6 months. If you fail to meet expectations, your employment will be terminated." Taylor nodded slowly, absorbing each word. James looked past her toward Lucille. This outcome was personally endorsed by Mrs. Grant. Had she preferred a different resolution, you wouldn't be standing here. Taylor turned to Lucille, who rose from her seat with quiet precision. Their eyes locked again. Taylor felt a sudden urgency rise in her chest. She didn't know what to say, or if anything she said now could matter more than what she had already failed to do. "Thank you," she said softly. Lucille gave the smallest of nods. "Make it meaningful." Then she turned and walked away. The sound of her cane tapping against the floor faded, but the weight of her presence lingered like smoke. Taylor stood in place for a moment longer, unsure if she should feel grateful or ashamed. Neither fit. What she felt was smaller, rawer, something closer to responsibility. James stepped forward again. Report to training headquarters Monday morning. Taylor nodded. Yes, sir. The executives moved on, leaving Taylor standing alone in the terminal, surrounded by people and yet completely exposed. This wasn't vindication. It wasn't redemption. It was a chance. A rare one. And it would demand more from her than anything she'd faced so far. She thought back to the beginning, to the moment she'd raised her voice at the gate, to the sound of the cane hitting the floor, to the absolute certainty with which she had believed she was right. That certainty was gone now. In its place, something else had taken root. Doubt, yes, but also the first seeds of clarity. She walked slowly, unsure where to go, her name badge still clipped to her uniform. People passed by without recognition. No one in the crowd knew what had happened on the plane or inside the conference room. No one knew that she had stood before the most powerful woman in the company and crumbled. But she knew. Back at the gate, she paused and looked out at the tarmac. Another plane taxied into position. Another crew prepared for another flight. Everything was moving forward as if none of it had happened. And maybe, for everyone else, it hadn't. But for Taylor, nothing would ever move forward the same way again. She thought about what Lucille had said, about what it meant to be made invisible, to be turned into a problem. She thought about the questions she still couldn't answer, why she had done it, why she had looked at a passenger and made a decision before the facts had a chance to matter. She had believed she was just enforcing the rules. But deep down, she had enforced something else, something she hadn't wanted to name until now. Bias. It was ugly. It was quiet. It looked like protocol and sounded like professionalism, but it was neither. She had always taken pride in her precision, her efficiency, but she had never asked herself whether those things were covering something else entirely. Now, she didn't have the luxury of avoidance. This would follow her, not as a scar to hide, but as a reminder to carry. She walked toward the exit, the wheels of her suitcase rolling behind her, her steps slower than usual, heavier. She wasn't walking away from a punishment. She was walking toward the hardest work of her life, facing herself, owning it, changing. Monday came fast. The training headquarters sat on the far end of the corporate campus, past the rows of hangars and admin offices. Taylor arrived before the sun had fully climbed. She didn't wear her uniform. She didn't carry her badge. She was told to report in plain clothes, ready to observe, to learn, and more importantly, to listen. The first session wasn't about policy. It was about perception. A speaker stood at the front of a quiet conference room and asked a simple question. When you look at someone, what assumptions do you make before they say a single word? No one answered. Taylor's pen hovered over her notepad, unmoving. The instructor went on. We don't mean to do it, but we do. And when we do it often enough, it stops feeling like bias. It just feels like instinct, like efficiency, like experience. That word, experience, landed hard, because that was what Taylor had always leaned on. Her experience, her routine, her sense of control. The instructor asked everyone to write down the worst mistake they had made while wearing the company uniform. No names, just the moment, the impact, the consequence. Taylor didn't hesitate. She wrote the date, the gate, the sentence. You don't belong here. She wrote the sound of a cane hitting the floor, the silence of a crowd, the echo of her own voice, sharp and confident, weaponized by certainty. When the session ended, she sat alone for a long time, the paper still in front of her. She didn't shred it. She folded it, carefully, put it in her bag, not to forget it, to keep it. The weeks passed. Taylor attended every class, every module. Some days were dry, terms and definitions, protocols revisited. Others were harder. Real passengers shared real stories about being overlooked, about being judged, about being dismissed in quiet, casual ways that left lasting damage. No one brought up Lucille Grant. No one had to. Everyone knew. The story had moved through the company like wind, silent, invisible, but impossible to ignore. Not in gossip, in atmosphere, in expectation. The training staff never treated her like a cautionary tale, but they never let her forget what she represented either. Not failure, not malice, but blind spots, unchecked habits, moments that revealed something deeper than policy ever could. Taylor didn't fight it. She sat with it. She owned it. By month 3, she had changed. not just in knowledge, but in awareness. She noticed who got interrupted in class, who got overlooked, who avoided speaking because they assumed no one was listening. She started asking different questions. She started listening longer. She still didn't feel redeemed. She didn't know if that was even the goal anymore. But she felt different. She felt awake. At the 6-month mark, she received an email, a meeting. Richard Montgomery, final review. When she arrived, he didn't ask her to explain herself. He asked her what she had learned. She didn't give a polished speech. She didn't list bullet points. She said this: I thought knowing the rules meant I understood people. It doesn't. And following the rules doesn't protect you from harming someone if you use them as a shield to ignore what's right in front of you. Richard sat in silence for a long moment. Then he nodded. You're being reinstated, he said. Full capacity, effective immediately. Taylor nodded once. Thank you, she said. Richard leaned forward. You've earned this chance. Don't waste it. She didn't. Back in uniform, everything looked familiar but felt altered. The crew room, the gate monitors, the passenger flow. She moved with the same precision, the same discipline, but no longer with blind confidence. She saw people differently, not as categories, not as roles, as people. She never told her coworkers about the paper folded inside her locker. She never showed anyone what it said. But before every flight, she unfolded it. Read the date, read the sentence, folded it back again, not as guilt, as compass. One day, months later, she walked past a gate where a new trainee was struggling with a flustered elderly couple, language barrier, boarding confusion, tension mounting fast. Taylor stepped in gently, offered support, smoothed things over. Afterwards, the trainee looked at her. How do you stay so calm under pressure? Taylor smiled, not out of pride, but memory. By remembering the time I didn't. And she left it at that. That night in the flight, she walked through the cabin with quiet ease. Passengers called for blankets, drinks, answers. She responded to each one, not faster, not louder, just more present. Halfway through service, she paused at seat 3A. An older woman, quiet, traveling alone. Taylor smiled. Can I get you anything? The woman looked up, her eyes kind. No, dear, I'm fine. You just remind me of someone I used to work with. Taylor raised an eyebrow. Is that a good thing? The woman nodded. Depends on the version of her you remember. Taylor chuckled, moved on. She didn't look back, but she felt it. Growth didn't come from shame. It came from seeing clearly what shame was trying to show you and doing better. Not once, every day. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer someone isn't perfection, it's change. And sometimes the only way to prove you belong isn't by asserting it. It's by becoming someone who makes others feel like they do too. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to today's story. We're deeply grateful for your presence and attention. This story wasn't just about a moment at an airport. It was about how easy it is to judge, how hard it is to face our own mistakes, and how powerful it can be to choose change over pride. The lesson we hope you carry with you is simple but lasting. True respect isn't measured by status or appearance, but by how we treat others, especially when no one is watching. If you felt something while listening, anger, hope, reflection, we invite you to let us know. Just hit the like button, leave a comment below telling us which country you're watching from, and share your thoughts about the story. Your voice matters and helps us grow. And please, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. One small click means the world to us and keeps powerful, meaningful stories like this coming your way. Thank you again. We're honored to have shared this story with you.